Welcome to the Rochester, New Hampshire History Podcast, a monthly show that will shine a light on a piece of history that has been all but forgotten.
In 1884, Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is published. The Washington Monument is completed in Washington, D.C. Harry S. Truman is born in Missouri and will become the 33rd President of the United States. The cornerstone for the Statue of Liberty is laid in New York Harbor. Also, in 1884, a map is made of East Rochester. One can see changes in the landscape, architecture, roads, bridges, all in a three-dimensional view. Let's see how amazing this map is. The school that is known as the Nancy Loud School was built in 1880. The 1884 map shows the old school on Cachicco Avenue, where it has stood the test of time. On the map, there is a round structure in the school's field that is not there anymore. I suspect this was the well for the school's water supply.
On Front Street, back then, the Cachicco woolen mills were one of the biggest employers in East Rochester. The map does a great job showing the buildings that comprise all of the mills. The mills were built in the 1860s and used the Salmon Falls River for power. This is interesting. The map shows there was a canal that drained into the factory. The dam created a reservoir so that there was always enough water to channel into the canal. The canal went directly into the mill to generate power. Today, the woolen mills are gone, and the Boston Felt Company resides in this spot, and the canal has been filled in.
This is Main Street in 1884. Here is the Baptist Church, and across the street from it is the Methodist Church. Today, both of these churches are over 100 years old and are still relevant and have strong congregations. Regarding the Baptist Church, there is a building next to it in the 1884 map that is no longer there. The map shows a wooden building, which was known as Washington Hall. Here is a partial picture of the Washington Hall. It is the building on the right. It was replaced 18 years later by the brick East Rochester Fire Station in 1902.
Also on Main Street was a large hotel called the Glendon House, which opened in 1878. This was the fanciest hotel in East Rochester. It was conveniently located near the railroad depot. The hotel was at the intersection of Main Street and what would become Route 202. The Glendon House was torn down in the 1970s and replaced with the Cumberland Farms.
Here is Grove Street in 1884. Abbott Street was already established, but Pearl Street appears to be more of a path than an actual street, which it is today. Unlike today, there aren't many houses nor streets intersecting with Grove Street back then.
The Cold Spring Cemetery was already established and in use back then. The first burial was a young man named Benjamin Blaisdell, who died from wounds inflicted upon him in the Civil War. What is interesting is that the map shows no paths or roads to the cemetery back then. Currently, that is not the case, as Spring Street will bring you to the cemetery. Another difference between then and now is Key Baseball Field, which is located next to the cemetery. Back then, the baseball field does not show on the map. The field would come into existence 64 years later. On September 16, 1948, Forrest Lincoln Key donated the baseball field to the East Rochester Baseball Association.
In 1884, at the end of Grove Street, there was a huge factory named the Fog and Vinyl Boot and Shoe Factory. The building burned down. All that remains today of the factory is part of the foundation, which can be seen here. The following picture was taken from the top of the shoe factory. One can see landmarks we have previously discussed. Here is the Glendon House Hotel on Main Street, the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, and the old school.
There used to be a railroad bridge spanning the Salmon Falls River, which connected New Hampshire to Maine. The railroad bridge is gone, but today you still can see part of the base on the East Rochester side of the Salmon Falls River. The railroad bridge was located upstream of the Cachicco woolen mills.
On Main Street, there is another building that has stood the test of time. It is the Blaisdell Block. In 1884, it was already in use, and over the years it has contained several businesses, including a barbershop, drugstore, and a restaurant. Here is an old picture with a trolley car parked next to it, and across the street one can see a portion of the Glendon House. Today, Boucher's Corner Store occupies the Blaisdell Block.
In East Rochester, what we call Portland Street was known by a different name. Back in 1884, it was called Rochester Street, which would connect to Portland Street in Rochester. Today, this street is populated with houses. Several streets intersect with it, and the East Rochester School resides there.
Today, if you go west on Highland Street, you can connect to the Spalding Turnpike. Back in 1884, if you went west on Highland Street, the road would end at a bunch of trees.
Today, if you go east on Highland Street, one can travel to Lebanon, Maine by the way of the bridge. This bridge was built in the 1940s. Back in 1884, Highland Street stopped at the intersection of Main Street, and there was no bridge. And in 1884, the bridge to cross Salmon Falls River was actually located upstream next to the railroad bridge we previously discussed.
This ends the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please email bobgriffinpodcast@gmail.com and come back next month for another episode of Rochester, New Hampshire History.